Today is the Feast of the Annunciation, which makes sense both in terms of calendar. So today is March 25th, which means you have 9 months of shopping days left until December 25th of this year. It also makes a certain amount of sense in our latitudes, our climate, in where it's placed, I think. So the Feast of the Annunciation almost always happens in the middle of Lent and a time of relative darkness or time of relative cloudiness in our liturgical year, which matches some of the relative cloudiness or darkness of March in the Northern Hemisphere, or at least our part of it, where we get a little taste of spring, a little taste of something in the future, but so often, like today as I'm recording, where it's still cloudy and rainy and uncertain. And that's where I think thinking about Mary as a model of hope for us might be helpful in our times. We know this story well. We know the story of the angel Gabriel appearing to Mary in Nazareth, and the first things the angel says are, "Hail, full of grace, the Lord is with you." And our text says, continues, "But Mary was greatly troubled at what was said, and pondered what sort of greeting this might be." Before moving on to the rest of the story, to Mary's famous saying that, "Behold, I am the handmaid of the Lord, may it be done to me according to thy word." Before we get there, it might be helpful to stop with the idea that Mary is greatly troubled. Um, we live in times that feel greatly troubled in our world, in our church, in our city, with so many people's jobs and job insecurity at the front of our minds, with so much danger to some of our migrant families and to people we know who are migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. Even the weather seems a little troubled. How do we have space, even when we are greatly troubled, to trust in God? In the last couple of weeks for our adult faith formation series on faith, hope, and mental wellness, I was talking about the virtue of hope and how do we think about hope. And how is hope different than kind of a casual optimism that expects everything will just work out fine? In fact, at least one author I looked at wrote about the idea that hope comes into its being, comes into importance precisely where optimism disappoints, where our optimistic efforts to rely on our own strength or to rely on our own structures and systems fails. And so the only one we have to turn to in hope is God. The Annunciation is often seen as a way of reflecting on Mary as a model of faith, a model of knowing who God is. But here we have an idea of Mary as a model of hope, a model of how to expect God to accompany us even when things seem greatly troubled. Mary lived in troubled times as well. Mary lives in Nazareth, in an occupied territory of the Roman Empire. She has hopes, I'm sure, for her own life that having this child might not fit with. She has hopes for her people. She has hopes for humanity. We get some sense of that, the wideness of Mary's hope, just a little bit further in the Gospel of Luke, when she goes to visit her cousin Elizabeth, pregnant with John the Baptist, and gives her great song, her Magnificat, that talks about hope for lifting the mighty down from their thrones and raising up the lowly, filling the hungry with good things, helping Israel and remembering God's mercy. We find a sense of hopes that are both for her as an individual and hopes for her people and hopes for our world and liberation for all creatures in our world that we see in Mary's song of hope. So in these times, when the Annunciation seems to come like a little bit of small crocuses or daffodils coming out of the ground that's still covered in some, not ice, but at least mush in our climate, or when days seem cloudy, both literally and metaphorically, in a world and a city that is filled with a lot of danger and in which we might often be greatly troubled, we might look to Mary as a model of how to hold on to hope in God rather than optimism rooted in our own strength. We might look to Mary as a proof of God being present even in the midst of our difficulties, even when it seems least likely that we're going to find an easy way out. And yet ask her to show us the way to trust God. Ask her to show us the way to look forward to what God is going to do for her, what God is going to do for us, and what God in the Annunciation and in the Incarnation has done for all of our world. So happy Feast of the Annunciation.